It will make a little buzzing noise when it's starting to record. So there we go. So we can get started. So just in terms of housekeeping, if you wouldn't mind keeping yourself on mute throughout this presentation today, just for the purposes of the recording, that would be really helpful. There will be the opportunity to ask questions at the end. So please save any questions for then, or you can pop any questions in the chat and we can try and answer them as we go along. But there will be the opportunity for questions. There is a lot to get through today, so we will whiz through the slides, but we will be emailing the slides to you after the session. So don't worry about taking notes on the slides and things. You'll be sent a copy of all of those. So just in terms of what we're going to go through today, so we're going to give an introduction to us and also to the Partnerships for People in Place programme. We're going to give an overview of the grants and the purpose, aims and objectives, a bit about who can apply, so eligibility criteria, that kind of thing. Then we're going to talk you through the application process cycle, when to apply, and then we'll go through step-by-step application guidance. So we're going to go through each question that you have to answer and give you a little bit of information about each of those and what we're expecting. We'll then look at kind of what happens next, how your application's assessed, and then any additional questions. So I hope that's what everyone was expecting from today. If you've been to one of our information sessions before, it's a very similar format, so you'll be familiar with that. So in terms of some of the key terms that we're going to be using in today's session, so VCS, voluntary community sector, we'll be using words like organisation or group interchangeably. It basically means the body that's applying for the funding. We'll refer to the grant agreement, which is the legally binding agreement all organisations have to sign in order for us to give you funding. And we'll also refer to your request, which is basically your request for funding. Sometimes it will be called project or application. So if we use any of those terms, that's what we're talking about. Hopefully there won't be any other jargon today, but obviously if there is, do pop it in the chat if you're not sure what we're talking about. So just a very brief introduction to the team who you'll be working with for this. Rachel, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, sorry, I couldn't go off mute. Yeah, sorry, my name's Rachel Salmon. I'm a Strategic Delivery Officer in the Policy and Strategic Delivery team in Hackney Council, but I'm also acting as the Programme Manager for Hackney Partnerships for People in Place.
Thanks, Rachel. And then I'm Lisa, the Grants Investment Manager. Some of you on the call I know already, so nice to see you again and nice to see the new faces. And also in the grants team, we have Moyo, Tom and Sue, who are also on the call. You may be dealing with them at some point over the application or grant life cycle, as that's everyone in the team. So yeah, just so you know who everyone is. Now I'm going to hand over to Rachel for the next few slides, who's going to give a little bit more information and background to the Partnerships for People in Place programme. Go ahead, Rachel.
Thanks a lot. Okay, so the Partnerships for People in Place programme is a central government initiative that aims to get central government departments working collaboratively with local government services, local communities and organisations to solve particular problems in a particular neighbourhood. And Hackney is one of 13 pilots nationally. And what we are expected to do is analyse what's already there and what we want to achieve. So looking at what services are already going into the area, test, to collaborate and identify a small set of priority outcomes and interventions, connect, identify solutions that can simplify and streamline central and local government coordination, learn, capture best practice and share learning and tools, and also propose different ways of doing things, particularly to central government, but also maybe to sort of local government, and think about what we can learn as the council and other statutory agency. So it is quite an ambitious programme in terms of its aspirations. So Hackney pitched the following idea. So we wanted to help people to age well by taking a preventative approach. We wanted to work with local communities and services within a specific neighbourhood. And we wanted to support people to age well by joining up place-based health and social care place-based health and social care system. So you might know about City and Hackney neighbourhoods and the primary care networks and how that links up with adult social care in particular. So we want to kind of join up with that system, but we also wanted to kind of join that up with local community and voluntary organisations, so we can think about how we help people to age well, how we bring sort of non-institutional settings into that sort of system. And so there are a number of initiatives that are being led by GPs, for example, in the health service, but how can we bring the sort of non-institutional settings into that and actually get to people where they actually engage in many cases. So okay, so the way we propose to do this is by co-producing and implementing a flexible grants program based on a funder plus model. So we've had quite a lot of sessions where we've done sort of mapping with local residents, local organisations, and sort of health service colleagues to think about what's already in the area. But we also did a sort of a kind of collaborative program design session on the 19th of July, where we tried to, people work together to identify the priority areas and outcomes for this program, which I will go into. But we don't just want to kind of give people money, but we want to encourage organisations to collaborate with each other and the statutory services locally and possibly ideally nationally, but that is quite a big ask. But we also want to take a sort of behavioural change approach. So we do have the services of a behavioural change expert, which we hope will, we want groups to work together to think about how they evaluate what they do, to consider how things are going and how we can work more effectively. How can we use behavioural change techniques to change the way we work, but also maybe to inform how we work with people. How can we be more effective in encouraging people to change their behaviour? So okay, so why do we choose that? So we chose the Hackney Marshes neighbourhood, which is one of 8 neighbourhoods based on primary care networks, so groups of GP practices in Hackney. And we chose Hackney Marshes because it does have relatively high levels of social and economic deprivation. It's relatively under invested, so it's largely residential, and it doesn't have a lot of kind of businesses or commercial activities. And it's also quite geographically isolated. So if you know the area, you've got walk from, even walking from Clapton is a 20-minute walk. It's between Clapton and Homerton stations. But it has got some assets. You've got Hackney Downs. There is a vibrant community there. And it also hosts Kings Park Moving Together, which is a Sport England pilot. It's a multi-million-pound initiative to help people to become more physically active. So we want to build on what they've been doing and the knowledge they've got of the area as well. So that's why we chose it Hackney Marshes. And we do want to focus specifically on the Kings Park ward as well, because that is the isolated part of the neighbourhood. Okay, so what we're going to do, so in terms of the program as a whole, we are developing a network of local and national professionals, residents and community organisations, and building links between Hackney, the City and Hackney neighbourhoods and Kings Park Moving Together. So we're building the network and making those connections. We're disseminating information about opportunities that may be of interest to organisations, particularly working with residents in the area. So we've put out a call for people who'd like to host a Job Centre Plus staff. We've sent out information for organisations to help them support people through the cost of living crisis. So we want to try and disseminate information as far as possible. We want to work with wider services and national government agency to draw additional resources and activities into the area. So, as I say, we started off with the Job Centre Plus. They are very keen to move some staff into the area so they can support people more directly. We want to, experiment with more collaborative budgets, collaborative program design methods. So and to deliver a programme of funded activities and work, which is what we're talking about today. We want to oversee work to determine the long-term viability of about 8 or 9 council-owned community spaces. So one of the things that local people have constantly told us whenever we're in discussion with them is there's a lack of usable community halls and community space in the area. We do have quite a lot of council-owned spaces, but a lot of them are inaccessible. They're not, we can't maintain them all physically, so we need to think about how we best use those in a financial viable way in the future. So we are sponsoring a piece of work specifically around that. And then we want to help local organisations to find funding and support to develop. So there's this kind of funder plus, mentality, that we're not just giving people grants, but we're trying to, capacity build them as well, and find them some support to actually grow and take a behavioural change approach, which I've said. And then influence national policy, especially around employment of older people. So we've already started some discussions with the Department of Employment about the kind of support that's available to people who are over 50, and many of whom may want to change careers, some of whom may be unemployed, but very often the kind of support that they offer is not flexible enough. So we want to bring a bit of real world kind of experience to them and make some recommendations to them and hopefully influence national policy. We also want to influence national policy in relation to community resilience and how, the Department for Levelling Up approaches that, but also in terms of the way health spending is used as well, because again, that's very often top down and doesn't necessarily always relate to how things work within a particular area. And then we want to introduce influence local policy, such as the councils, things like planning policies, the redevelopment of Clapton roundabout, regeneration around the Clapton conversation. Because one of the things that older people have said to us is that they'd like to do more, but the public realm is very difficult, it's very isolated, it's not always accessible. So we want to try and link up with wider policies, both nationally and locally. Okay, so in terms of this particular program, then, the grants program, which this is part of this this process. So we came up with, had the collaborative program design session, as I said, on the 19th of July. And what we did is we came up with 4 priorities and some outcomes to support them. So the first is about getting connected. So this is all about, actually getting information to older people, whether that's improving their digital skills or improving the way information is delivered through word of mouth, or improving the way that information is delivered by professionals. So for example, when somebody goes to a doctor or they ring up the council, how can we improve the quality of information, the way people are interacted with, the way people understand information, the range of information we can give them. So that could be, it's a whole range of things that could come under that priority. Then also improving opportunities. So, this could be anything from social opportunities, employment opportunities, access to sort of local amenities and facilities. So that might be, improving sort of, for example, if you've already got, let's say, lunch clubs or services that already exist for older people in the area, you might want to reach more people. So you might put in a proposal so you can reach more people. But then also you might have services that are already existing that are maybe not geared towards older people. How can you make those activities user friendly? And I suppose ideally we'd want to kind of try and build on what's already there, rather than funding a lot of additional activities that we can't fund, because this is obviously short-term funding. So we do need to think about what we can sustain. And then understanding aging. So it's about encouraging a wider discussion amongst people of all ages around aging and what that means. So people not just so older people can look after themselves better, but also people can think about aging from a younger age and therefore prevent, take steps at a young age to prevent some of the negative aspects of aging, and then making the most of our assets. So that's kind of small pieces of work that would make some of our public spaces or some of our, let's say, buildings more accessible to older people. We don't have a lot of work money, so we can't fund major capital work, but there may be certain things, tweaks that we can make that make our spaces, a bit more accessible to older people. Next slide, Lisa. Thank you. So in terms of guiding principles, we want to encourage a culture of collective decision making. So we had the participatory design session, but we're going to have a grants panel that's going to be made up of residents, representatives of voluntary organisations, the NHS, partner agencies, public health, but also national agencies as well. And as I said, we want to promote collaboration. We want the organisations we fund to work together, and also with local statutory agencies. We encourage consortium bids. We will allow you to apply for a bit of extra money if you are applying as a consortium in order to cover your management costs. Coordinating services across sectors. So ideally, we'd come up with a cohesive programme of initiatives that link in with wider services, so it's not just a scattered range of random initiatives. Improving outcomes, so particularly for those over 50. Sustainability, so think about the fact that this is short-term funding, and we do need to think about what we leave as a legacy after this. So it's worth thinking about that. If you could, yeah. Okay, and also, so behavioural change, as I've said, we want to think about how we change the way we work together, but also not just thinking about, how we get people to be more healthy or how we change the behaviour of residents, but we also need to think about how we all work. Making the best use of public money. So, like I say, joining up, collaboration. If we can, find match funding, that would be great. Building on what we already have. So again, it's not a huge amount of money. So, we do want to build on what we already have rather than creating a lot of extra things that we can't sustain. Neighbourhood focus. So it focuses on Hackney Marshes neighbourhood, but particularly around Kings Park. So, there will be a particular focus on, or you will need to show that you understand the area and that you know who you're going to work with, and you're willing to work with other people in the area. Building capacity and community leadership. So again, we don't just want to fund, give you money and then tell you to go away and just provide us information on a quarterly basis. We want to, use the funding and this program to build local capacity and skills, and then obviously think about equality and inclusion. So not just, think about different groups of older people, race, disability, think about the intersections between age and other equality characteristics. Yeah, just a summary again of the priorities and objectives. So helping people to age well in Hackney Marshes neighbourhoods by getting connected, improving opportunities, understanding aging, and making the most of our assets. And I think, is it you next, Lisa?
Thanks, Rachel. That's really helpful. Great. So in terms of the grants available for this programme, so as Rachel's just explained, it is one programme, but we have 3 different types of grants available, which we're going to go through all of them today. It's a shared application form. So essentially, if you are an unregistered group, so you might be a group of residents, you're not kind of formalised, you're not a registered charity or anything like that, you can apply for a grant of up to £3,000. So if you're familiar with our other grant programmes, this is similar to our community chest grant. So it's very kind of small, short-term project, and you don't need to be a constituted group in order to apply for that funding. For groups that are registered, such as charities, social enterprises, community and trust companies, etc., you can apply for a grant of up to £10,000, although please note that you cannot apply for a grant that's more than 50% of your annual income. So if your annual income last year was £10,000, you can apply for £5,000. And that's kind of outlined in the guidance, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later in today's session as well. And then, as Rachel mentioned, we do want to encourage groups to work in partnership with each other. So if you would like to apply as a consortium, so as a group of organisations coming together under a lead organisation, then you can apply for up to £15,000. And the reason for that kind of extra money is partly because there'll be more groups involved, so there's probably increased costs, but also so that there's a little bit of funding there for the administration costs for that lead organisation who would be overseeing that consortium. So it's three very similar but slightly different projects, but it's all via the same application form, same guidance, same everything else. So this is really just kind of details, but we'll be going through all of that today. So in terms of eligibility, again, if you're familiar with our grants programs already, you'll know that we accept applications from voluntary and community sector organisations working within Hackney. So you have to be a not-for-profit organisation. So that could be a registered charity, a social enterprise, a community of interest company, etc. You just must make sure that you, if you are a social enterprise or a company limited by guarantee, you have to have a clear asset lock and be not for profit. So we will be looking at eligibility as part of your due diligence documents. So just make sure that you are, a constituted not for profit organisation. And as mentioned, for those smaller applications for £3,000 and under, you could be a structured group of local residents, and that could be that you form for a specific person. So purpose, apologies. So you could be an established group who've been meeting for a number of years, or you could have formed for a one-off event or something like that, but you can apply for that smaller amount. So in terms of what we can't fund, so we can't fund applications that don't meet the grant scheme criteria, so what we've been talking about today. We can't fund retrospective applications, so things that have already taken place. We can't fund things that last beyond 6 months of the start date, so this is very short-term funding. We can't fund contingency or contingent liabilities. So basically that means putting something aside for unforeseen circumstances, or things such as warranties on equipment, guarantor loans, etc. We can't fund activities for religious or politically orientated purposes. So we can't fund something that is going to advance a religious or political agenda, but we do accept applications from religious groups for inclusive community activities. We can't fund the purchase of alcohol or activities in which alcohol consumption is the main theme. We can't fund applications for an individual or where an individual receives the main benefit. This grant funding is for organisations, not for individuals. And as mentioned, we can't fund applications for an amount that's more of 50% than the organisation's annual income. So just in terms of very quickly what the process looks like. So first of all, plan your application. So we've obviously got this information session today, and the video of this will live on our website alongside the guidance document, which you can access. And there's other video resources that you can use to help you as well. So once you're ready, you can apply via our online application portal. When you've submitted your application and your supporting documents, that will be screened by the grants team to make sure that you're eligible, and we'll look through your due diligence documents, and then that will be passed on to assessors who, as Rachel mentioned, are comprised of council officers, government officers, voluntary sector partners, residents, so a real group of people. They will assess your application and meet at a panel to decide which groups that we will be funding through this grant programme. Once those decisions have been made, groups will be notified either way. If your application isn't successful, we'll always aim to give you feedback. And if it is successful, then we'll go on to issue your grant agreement, sort out your payment and things like that. And we'll also be in touch. As Rachel mentioned, we want this to be a funder plus relationship. So we don't just want to pass on money and let you get on with it. We want to build up a relationship with you and support you over the period of your grant. So there'll be other workshops and sessions looking at monitoring and evaluation and that kind of thing throughout the life cycle of your grant, which we'll be in touch about. So I think, Rachel, you're going to talk through the key dates for this one.
Okay, yeah. So applications opened on Monday, the 15th of August, and I'd strongly advise you to sort of log into the portal and register if you need to, and just familiarize yourself with the application questions. Have a look at the guidance and start preparing your application. Maybe talk to other organizations locally who you might want to work with. And then the closing date is Friday, the 16th of September. So you do, have quite a long time, but obviously these things go quickly, and, we do have leave and so on. So just think about that. So it's actually at noon on the 16th of September. And then I think on the 28th of September, we're going to be doing the panel. So that's hopefully when we'll be making our decisions. And then you should be hearing pretty soon after that. So we aim to get delivery going from October 2022. We would envisage at the moment that projects will last for 6 months. So hopefully we should be able to start delivery in October. I know the government department is very keen to get it all done and dusted, and the evaluations and so on, and all the information to get by the end of the financial year. That might be a bit ambitious, so it might kind of bleed into the next financial year. But ideally, we do want to get things sort of kind of started as soon as possible.
Thanks, Rachel. So now I'm going to go through the technical bit. This is where it always goes wrong. So fingers crossed, everyone. So as mentioned, your applications have to be submitted on our online grants application portal. So you can access the link via our website. You'll need to set up a login or sign in using one that you've already created. And once you've done this, you can go back into the application portal as often as you need to kind of make changes to your applications. You can save your progress as you go along, but we really do advise that you keep your answers on a kind of offline document and copy and paste it into the application just in case you lose any work, because unfortunately it has happened. If your internet connection cuts out or something and it hasn't saved, and there's nothing that we can do to recover that for you. So please do keep an offline copy of your application. So now let us see if it's going to let me come on this. Brilliant. So when you go to apply, it's going to take you to this page, which you need to spell your email address right. Yeah. And then your password. If you're a new applicant, you just click the new applicant link there. Otherwise, you just log in. And the first time you log in, it's going to take you to this eligibility quiz. So this is basically to make sure that you really can apply for this grant and to direct you to the correct application form based on which grant you're going to apply for. So do answer these questions kind of truthfully. The last thing you want to do is, oh, well, I think 80% of the beneficiaries are Hackney Marshes residents, but I'm not sure, so I'm going to apply anyway. But it will just waste your time. So these eligibility questions are really there to make sure that you're not applying for something that you shouldn't be. So you have to be a not-for-profit. 80% of your beneficiaries have to be Hackney Marshes residents, and you also have to have these key due diligence documents. Your project will be taking place for 6 months. And then this question E here is just to check which grant you're applying for. So obviously you've got the 3 options: the one for unregistered groups for up to £3,000, the one for kind of registered groups, charities, social enterprises, etc., for up to 10,000, and then the consortium application for up to 15,000. So you just select from this drop down which one you're going for. So I'm going to go for number 2 and press submit. And then it's going to take you to the application form. So again, if you've applied for a grant with us before, you'll be familiar with the format. But basically what we've got here is all of your application questions. So there's different sections to the application form. You'll see questions with a red asterisk are mandatory, so it's not going to let you submit your application if you don't answer those. And you'll see we've got different sections. So we've got about your organisation, about your project, about your beneficiaries, etc. So you can go through the different tabs and look at all of the questions. As I said, you can fill bits out and then save it and come back to it, but do make sure you're keeping an offline copy of that as well. So that's essentially what it looks like. We're going to go through each question on the presentation now, so I will come off this bit, but as Rachel said, it's a good idea to familiarise yourself with what that looks like. And if you've got any technical problems, please do let us know at the Community Partnerships email. Please don't leave it till the last minute to try and submit your application. If you're submitting your application at 11:55 and suddenly something goes wrong with the portal, we're not going to be able to help you. And similarly, you know, that is a hard deadline at midday. It's not, you know, flexible. We can't accept your application at 1 p.m. We will be turning it off at midday and you won't be able to submit it. So if you are experiencing any issues, please get in touch with us as soon as possible. So I've already gone through the eligibility quiz, but yeah, just to mention again, it's there to make sure that you're applying for the right grant and that you're actually eligible for it. So do look at the questions and choose the right answers accordingly. So section 1 is about your organisation. So it includes information like your organisation's address, 2 key contacts, things about equalities, and background to your organisation. If you are already registered and have submitted an application before, then some of this information will be auto-populated, but do make sure you look through it just to make sure it's still all up to date and edit anything that isn't. And this section shouldn't take too long to complete, maybe around 10 minutes. So most of this question isn't scored, but we will take into account equalities information when making funding decisions. And question 1.8, which asks, what does your organisation do, is a really good opportunity for you to tell us a little bit more about your organisation in detail. So although this question isn't scored, being really clear in this answer will give the assessor a good idea of what your organisation is, what you do, why you exist, that kind of thing. So it's a really good kind of introduction to you. So don't assume that that assessors will know who your organisation is. So use question 1.8 as an opportunity to give an overview of your organisation. There are 2 questions in this section that are scored. So I'm just going to pass over to Rachel now, who's going to talk through question 1.9 and 1.10 and what we're looking for in those 2 questions.
Yes, so in the question 1.9, what we're really looking for examples of how you actually, I suppose we want to test your knowledge of the Hackney Marshes neighbourhood. So we want you to tell us about your experience working in this particular area, and it doesn't necessarily have to be you might have worked there in the past, doesn't necessarily have to be now. But think about, you know, we want to know what you know about the area, what you understand about the area, what you understand in terms of the key challenges, you know, in the area. And, you know, we want to get a bit of an understanding that, you know, who the key players in the area are, and, you know, so that you can work with them if you are actually successful, and that you really understand, you know, that you actually learn from your experience and you understand some of the issues, because this is a place-based project basically. And then so the next one, 1.10, are you working with any other groups or organizations to deliver this project? So again, this is this whole thing about, you don't necessarily have to apply as a formal consortium. So you might have, you know, you might be working with a lot of organizations who are going to be putting in their own applications. That's fine. But, you know, reference that and say, we're working with X, and, you know, so that we can see that you're collaborating, and that, you know what's going on in the area, and that you're prepared to work with other people to actually deliver collective objectives, and not just working like on your own in isolation. So, yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. And just to say, if you are applying for the consortium bid of up to £15,000, we will expect in this question that you give your named partners and what their involvement is in the project. So definitely have a very clear answer for this question if you're applying through that scheme. So section 2 of the application form. So this is probably the most important part of the application, because it's basically where you're telling us what you want the funding for. So this will probably take you the longest, maybe around 45 minutes. So make sure that your answers are logical and concise. We won't be marking your application on things like spelling and grammar or language. So, you know, don't worry about that. But we do need to be able to understand what you're asking for. So, you know, if it's easier to put things in bullet points or sections or whatever, do what you need to do that makes sense for you, but we need to understand what you're asking for. Assessors will be proportionate in their assessment of you, and what that basically means is if you're asking for £2,000, they'll expect less detail than if you're asking for £10,000. So, you know, the more you ask for, the more you're going to have to be kind of really clear and detailed in what you want. And in terms of a general tip for this question, we do recommend, if you can find someone who has little to no knowledge of your project and asking them to read over this, that's quite helpful, because if they're confused about any aspects of the project, then it probably means that an assessor will be too. So you just need to be kind of really clear. Don't assume that the assessors know anything about your organisation or your project, and make sure that you're outlining everything here. So in terms of the specific questions in this section, so 2.1 is your project summary. So basically it might be the name of your project or the snippy way that you would describe it externally. 2.2 is where the project will be delivered, so the physical location of the project. If this is outside of the Hackney Marshes neighbourhood or kind of near the borders of that, then we do advise that elsewhere in the application you reiterate how 80% of these beneficiaries will be Hackney Marshes residents. So yeah, you need to just be really explicit about that, because as Rachel said, we are looking very much at this as a place-based programme. And 2.3 will be your project start and end date. So just remember, the grant cannot start before October 2022, and it can only last up to 6 months. You may want to factor in a little bit of planning time at the start of that. So I don't know, if you're requesting funding for us and you're doing an event that starts on the 2nd of October, to kind of get things done and dusted by that time. So you might just want to be a bit careful and remember that we might not be able to get funding to you exactly on the nose on the 1st of October. So question 2.4a is probably the most important question. So I'm going to pass over to Rachel to explain this one, as it's about the programme priorities.
Okay, so yeah, this is the bit where we ask you to pick which of the 4 programme priorities your project is working towards. And you can select as many as you want, but just be careful about select, because there's a danger that maybe, like, we didn't want to sort of put people into boxes too much, because obviously sometimes, you know, what things that you want to do will tick more of those boxes. So we don't want to limit people, but at the same time, sometimes you can tick all of those and then just get very, very confused as to what you actually want to achieve. Like, you're trying to achieve everything. And I think if people are scoring these things, people might think, hang on, this is not realistic, and it's also very muddled. So just be careful about that. But you know, we've been through the priorities, so you know, is it getting connected and so on. Yeah, and also thinking about what you're going to achieve, and how it's going to meet the priority, the priorities and the outcomes. So what the project is going to achieve, how this fits in with the chosen priorities, how the project will achieve this, how it will be specifically delivered, who will benefit from the project, why the project is needed, and why your group is best placed to deliver it. And if the project targets a specific group, this should be linked back to why they specifically need this. Yeah, so I think, so you know, because trying to answer all those questions for multiple outcomes and objectives is, you can really tie yourself up in knots. So perhaps just think about narrowing down what you actually want to try and do, because it's not a lot of money, 10 or 15,000 pound anyway. So just I would say, be clear and focused. Yeah, as I said, you might want to reference more than one outcome. And also what we've said as well is that it's not just about doing, but how we do things and finding better ways of doing things. And we do want to reflect, time to reflect with you and to learn together. So we will accept, if you want to put in a bit of extra, think about your capacity. And, we will invite you to meetings. We'll ask you to take part in events. So just think about your capacity to do that and build that into your costings as well. We are happy to fund time for learning and reflection, because it is a doing project, but it's also a learning project.
Thanks, Rachel. So the next question in section 2.5, so how will the project be run and managed? So this is basically your opportunity to tell us about your project management. So even if your idea is amazing and the assessors have been really blown away, if you're not giving detail on how the project will be managed in this section, then the assessors will question your ability to deliver that. So make sure that you're including how you'll effectively plan and manage everything to do with your project. Think about the staff and volunteers who will be involved in delivering it. So include any particular skills or experience, and include that about your organisation as well. So if your organisation has done something similar in the past, talk about that and what you've learned from that. And make sure you're discussing all elements of the project planning. So, have you talked about recruiting beneficiaries? Have you talked about monitoring and evaluation? Have you talked about your timescale? That kind of thing. So as Rachel mentioned, do factor in that learning piece as well, as that's such an important part of this programme. So make sure that you're including all of that information in this answer. And the next question is 2.6. So this is asking you to tell us about any risks that you've anticipated in this project and how you're going to mitigate them. So a good application is going to identify relevant risks, assess the likelihood of this happening and the impact if it did, and then clearly articulate how this will be mitigated in practice. So one thing I would say about this section is never be subtle or imply things about risk. If it's a risk, say it. If you're working with children or vulnerable people, you're always going to have to include safeguarding in the risk section. You'll need to think about things like health and safety. Have you thought about COVID and any impact that might have? First aid, that kind of thing. So never imply, always list any kind of relevant risks and discuss them fully. Please don't just say, we'll do a risk assessment and move on to the next question. Like, this opportunity is for you to tell us more detail about that risk assessment. So make sure that you're including all that information in this question. So section 3 is about your beneficiaries. So just to say, if you are applying for the smaller grant of £3,000 or below, you will not have a section 3 in your application form. So you will not be asked to complete these questions, but for the other 2 applications, you will. So this section is basically asking you to tell us who your beneficiaries are, if you're targeting a certain group of people. So, if you've told us in your application that you're working with a certain beneficiary group, then this is your opportunity to tell us a bit more about who they are and why. Obviously, some projects are open to different ethnicities or ages or whatever, so it's fine to include that here as well, but just make sure you're always giving us the information about who your beneficiaries are. So questions 3.1 and 3.2 is asking how many beneficiaries you aim to target and how many volunteers will be involved. So these are just kind of numbered boxes. If you're not working with any volunteers, that's fine, leave that as 0. But just make sure whatever answers you put in here are consistent with the narrative of your application. So if you've told us in the question before, we're working with 20 beneficiaries, and suddenly in question 3.1, you're saying we're working with 500, the assessors are going to be very confused about that. So just make sure your answers are always very consistent. So question 3.3, I'm going to hand back to Rachel for this one.
Okay, so this is a bit where we ask you to tell us about who's going to benefit from your project. and also why you're focused on the group and how you're best placed to do so. So think about, so it may not be, most of the projects I suspect will be benefiting people who are over 50. But as I said, well, some of it could be about, we do mention intergenerational work, we mention having discussions with the whole community about aging. So they might not necessarily just be older people, or might not even be older people that you focus on. But also think about equality. If you are focusing on older people, is there a particular group of older people that you're looking at, like Black older people, or older people from a particular religious group, or older people who are disabled? So who's your benefit group, and how that project will benefit the chosen group? So how you kind of know that, what's your evidence, and you can use not just hard data, but if you've got feedback from your participants or so on, or you've got user data, and that you're not targeting a particular demographic that you want to reach, that's fine, and then why the project is needed for this chosen group of people, and why your group is best placed to deliver it. So what kind of reach have you got into that community that perhaps other groups haven't? So just think about that, and just ensure you address each of these bullet points to give assessors the best idea of who you're targeting and why, and make sure you talk about your experience of working with this group and or any supporting evidence, just so that we understand, you give us that sense that you're a real kind of authentic organization, and that you really understand the needs of this particular organization.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm also very conscious of time, that we have 11 minutes left, so we're going to speed through the next bit so that we've got some time for questions at the end. But question 3.4, so this is a follow-up from 3.3. So 3.3 is the narrative about your beneficiaries, and 3.4 is more of a tick box exercise for you to select which group specifically you're working with. So there'll be a section on each of the protected characteristics, so for example age or ethnicity, and you just need to select any target groups that you're working with. If you're not targeted, that's fine, you can select NA and move on to the next question, but just make sure again that what the boxes that you're ticking are consistent with the narrative in the rest of your application, and especially your narrative in question 3.3. So section 4 is the budget section. So again, this is a scored section. There are some calculator buttons on there, so make sure you're using them. They're there to help you to make sure that everything is costed properly, and make sure, as kind of a general rule, that you're not adding stuff into your budget that you haven't talked about earlier on in your application. So if you've not talked about laptops and then you suddenly talk about laptops in your budget, assessors are going to say, oh, hold on, what's going on here? What are the laptops for? So just make sure everything's consistent, and make sure you're putting in as much detail and breakdown as you possibly can. So how much can I apply for? This section is only in the application for the £10,000 grant. So again, this is just to make sure that you're not applying for more than 50% of your annual income. So there'll be a question to put in what your annual income is, and then it will calculate the maximum amount that you can apply for, obviously up to the amount of £10,000. If you are a new organisation that doesn't have any annual income at all, then you could consider applying for the £3,000 grant, as there isn't an income restriction limit on that particular grant. So question 4.1 is asking you what the amount that you're applying for. So as a reminder, it's £3,000, £10,000 or £15,000 are the maximum amounts you can apply for. Just remember, always check that this answer is the same as the one that's given in your budget breakdown. You'll be surprised how many times you get applications that it's not clear actually how much they're applying for. And 4.2 is asking what the total cost of your project is. So it could be, you might be applying for £10,000 from us, but also £5,000 from another funder. So you could tell us here the total cost is £15,000. So Question 3.4 will be a budget table. So you'll have the opportunity here to put in your expenditure heading, how much you're requesting from this grant. And then if you are applying for funding from other sources as well, you can put that in the final column as well. So make sure you're putting all of the information there. You've got space to put 8 headings, but you don't need to use them all. Or if you've got more headings, there's a box at the bottom where you can provide additional information. You don't need to put a pound sign or any commas in there. And just make sure you're using the calculator button at the bottom of that to make sure that what you've requested adds up to the total amount that you've said earlier in your application. So yeah, as I said, make sure your answers for 4.1 and 4.2 match what the calculator says at the bottom of your budget table. And as I said, there's space for budget notes at the bottom as well. So question 4.4 and 4.5 are optional questions regarding the Kings Park Moving Together funding. So I'm just going to hand back over to Rachel to talk through these two.
Okay, so as I said, this programme includes some cash from Kings Park Moving Together. So and that will specifically be aimed at initiatives that support people to be more physically active. So there's a couple of questions. Does your project include support for residents to be more physically active? So that's if you want to apply for a component of your proposal. So that Kings Park Moving Together is funding up to 3,000 for initiatives that include opportunities for older people to participate in some form of physical activity. So I think that's just a yes/no answer, whether you want to go for that funding as part of your proposal. And then if you answered yes to question 4.4, how much funding are you requesting for the physical activity element of your project, and what will it be used for? So there's a kind of little bit of a sub-budget section there, just so that we can extrapolate which projects relate to Kings Park Moving Together. We can justify our spending to Sport England, which is the funder for that, and we can make sure that when we're doing our analysis or when we're reporting to Sport England, we separate the the different initiatives between the two budget headings. So that's that.
Thanks, Rachel. And just to be clear, this £3,000 is included within the maximum amount you can apply for. So you can't say I want £10,000 and an additional 3,000 for KPMT. It's included in your overall cost for the project. So 4.6 is just if you have any funding from other sources. So if you are part funding something, then you should include this here and who you're getting funding for if you've been successful, that kind of thing. Francis, I've just seen your question popped up. Yes, please do apply for staffing costs as part of this. Staffing costs are eligible to include as part of this programme. So please do make sure that you're resourcing this adequately. So section 5, I'll just very quickly go through this. This is additional information about your organisation's bank account. So we need this to conduct fraud checks on the organisation. So you need to include your account name, your sort code and your account number. And you'll also be asked to upload a recent copy of your organisation's bank statement. So the team will be cross-referencing the answer you give here against your bank statement. So make sure that you're giving that accurately. Otherwise, we may have to ask you to do that again for us. Section 6 is attachments. So as mentioned earlier, there's certain documents that you'll need to provide for due diligence purposes. So things like your constitution or articles of association, your accounts, bank statement, safeguarding policies, etc. We don't expect all groups to have this, particularly if you're an informal group who's applying for up to £3,000. We don't expect that you're going to necessarily have an equality and diversity policy, but obviously we do expect that you'll have some kind of written constitution stating your purpose and why you formed and that you're not for profit, that kind of thing. So if you do have any questions about this while you're completing your application, do let us know and we can talk about this further, but there's lots of information in the guidance document about these as well. So I won't go through this in any detail. And then just the last bit of the application will be the declaration. So this is basically like the digital signature to confirm your application. And also there's an optional question if you would like to sign up to our grant newsletter if you're not already part of that as well. So once you've done your application, you'll be given the opportunity to overview everything. And as I said, if you've not answered a mandatory question, it will pop up that it won't let you submit it. So what happens next? We do always receive more applications than we're able to fund. So just bear in mind, you might write a really excellent application, but it doesn't mean that we'll definitely be able to fund you, because we have to look at all of the applications that we received. And the rest of this slide is just explaining the process that I talked about earlier. So we'll do due diligence checks. There'll be an assessment and a panel, and then you will be notified of the result of your application. I think Rachel's just going to very quickly talk about that scoring criteria for the applications.
Yeah, so we ask assessors to score each of the questions, the scoreable questions, from 0 to 3. So 0 being where the question answer is very incomplete or insufficient, to 3 where the answers the question excellently, no information is missing, provides relevant supporting evidence. So just think about those criteria when you're answering the questions, ensuring that you get all those components right for all the questions, so that scorers have got no choice but to give you a 3.
Thanks, Rachel. So in terms of any other key documents and resources, so do have a look at our website for links to all of these. There's the guidance document, and there's also video resources to help you access the portal and things like that. And then Rachel, I think you're going to talk a bit about other support available.
Yeah, so I will be available until Wednesday, the 7th of September, to give advice and support to people who want to apply. The community grant partnerships team, they can help you with the sort of technical aspects, filling in your form, some of the things that Lisa covered today. And I might need to refer to them if there's things I can't answer. And then also East London Business Alliance, they run an application review and support service. So they get, sort of volunteers from the city and so on to help people raise money. So you can have a look at that if you think that would be of use to help you with your application.
Thank you, Rachel. So I'm going to stop recording now, and with 1 minute to go, we've got the opportunity, if anyone would like to ask any questions.